Hello. All right. So I am happy to see you today. And we are continuing our read of Order, which is book 2 of my Rainbow series. I'm excited to say that we are reading episode 4, which means chapters 11, 12, and 13. All right. I'm going to see if other people are joining in. And then... All right. So, welcome in. I hope you are having a wonderful day. And let's get started, shall we? Where we left off Friday, Daniel and his grandson and their guards have left the castle in Nanairi, and they have landed on this island. Katerina and Dimitri don't know that they are gone, but they will find out soon. Okay. Reaching the castle, Dimitri. I woke up the next morning with a weight on my chest. I shifted slightly to look at whatever was on my chest, only to see Katerina's head. I suddenly remembered our talk from last night, and I smiled as I ran my hand over her hair. She was so beautiful and the kindest woman I'll ever meet. I was glad that I was going to marry her. She'd keep me honest, and I would give her stability. The thought of our future together brought images of little feet running through halls and little smiling faces. Go back to sleep. I can practically feel you smiling, Katerina said as she smacked my chest. I chuckled. It's time for us to get up anyway. Don't you want your niece back safely? She jerked up suddenly, and my hand fell to her waist. She looked at me in shock. It's morning already? I nodded, and she looked around. We fell asleep talking, she muttered. Then she crawled out of bed and went to start packing her stuff. We have to hurry and go to the castle. I smiled as I watched her. All right. Don't you want to eat first, though? No, she said. We can grab a meal later. Thank goodness that we packed the tent yesterday afternoon. True, I replied, getting up from the bed. She watched me as I stood up and stretched. Her eyes were huge, and her lips were parted slightly. As I looked at her, she licked her lips and looked away, blushing. I grinned. Then I walked past her to go to my room, saying, See something you like? A small screech came out of her mouth before a pillow hit the back of my head. My laughter followed me out of the room. Teasing Katerina was so much fun. I packed my things and met my blushing fiancé at the front door of the inn. I almost thought of her as my blushing bride there, I thought to myself, shaking my head. Okay, let's go. We have places to go and things to do. I walked outside, hearing Katerina mutter behind me. You're weird, she said, but lovable. She followed me to the stables, where the 2 horses I bought were. She went straight to one stallion, the one I bought specifically with her in mind, and stared at him in awe. Aren't you a handsome lad? She asked the horse, who started prancing in pride. I laughed softly, glad she was getting along with him. I then walked over to the stallion I got for myself, and patted his nose. Hey, boy. We got our horses ready, walked outside the stables, and mounted up. Let's go, I said, heading out towards the capital. All right, I'm coming. Katerina nudged her stallion into a trot to catch up to me. This won't take as long as walking, she said with a smile. Not at all, I smiled back at her, enjoying the camaraderie. I led the way to the capital of Nanari at a brisk canter. We were happy that we were going to see Elizabeth again soon. I looked straight ahead, straight towards my goal of getting Elizabeth back home, so that I can marry the love of my life. I couldn't wait to see the baby princess, and I hoped that she was safe, but I also wanted to make Katerina a happy bride. First things first, I thought with a smile. What are you thinking about? Katerina asked. I smiled. I was thinking about getting Elizabeth back home safely and then marrying you in a few months. Although I might not want to wait a few months. Hearing a small noise from Katerina, I looked over with a small smirk. She was blushing. I laughed and said, Okay, let's go. In a day and a half, we had reached the capital. Katerina led the way this time as we rode slowly through the capital village towards to the castle. She rode up to where 2 stable hands came to get our horses. Thank you, she said, as we dismounted and walked up to the castle door. She knocked and we were let in before she asked the butler, May we speak to King Daniel III and his lovely queen? It is extremely important. The butler's eyes widened when he recognized us, and he replied, Of course, your highness. Right away. Please follow me to the throne room. They are there now talking to some of the guards. We followed the butler to the throne room and waited for the king to acknowledge us. I wrapped my arm around Katerina's shoulders as we waited. The butler was speaking to the king in a quiet voice as the guards started looking at us in confusion. Then King Daniel III turned to us and motioned us forward. As we stepped forward through the crowd, the guards split so we could pass. I hear that you have something extremely important to speak with us about. King Daniel III raised his hand towards us. Yes, your majesty, I said. We bowed to them. Speak, he said. Katerina stepped forward out of under my arm. Your majesty, we have come all this way to ask if you have seen Prince Eduardo. We have to ask him a few questions. Her face showed her displeasure. I am sorry, my dear princess. Daniel frowned. My son and father were sent away to go to a moor to turn Eduardo in. Did they not make it? Katerina frowned in response. I haven't seen them on my way here. Besides, I am fairly sure that they are the reason that my niece was kidnapped. What? Asked the queen. She sat up straight, trying to understand how her son and father-in-law could be responsible for a kidnapping. Please start at the beginning, Princess Katerina. Yes, Your Majesty. Katerina took a deep breath and started. You see, my brother King Frederick and his wife Natalia had a little girl that they named Elizabeth. The day that Elizabeth was born, they received a threatening letter. That letter sent my sister-in-law into an early labor. Elizabeth was taken only a day later. Everyone gasped in shock. How could anyone kidnap an infant? My brother and sister-in-law were inconsolable, of course. When my brother snapped at me, I snuck out of the castle to go search for Elizabeth on my own. I put my arm back around Katerina's shoulders. I left the castle when King Frederick received a bloody baby dress. He had been told, with that package, that his daughter was dead. I was on my way to find Katerina to tell her about the death of her niece. I did not know that the bloody dress was fake. Then we heard rumors that 3 men and a baby were heading into Nanari, and we followed them. They have my niece and her guard. I don't know if either of them is hurt or safe, but I must find them, Katerina said with feeling. The king and his queen looked at each other. The king spoke. I don't know what to say. We sent them out to turn Eduardo in, not having known that my father was in on it. I am sorry about your niece and her guard. I hope you find them soon. Thank you, Your Majesty, Katerina said, curtsying. Do you have any idea of any hideouts that they might have used? King Daniel III shook his head. I don't. I'm sorry. I bowed. We understand. Thank you, Your Majesty. We were then dismissed because there was nothing else for us to do. We were told that we could stay a couple of days to rest, but we were conflicted about it. That night, as we were resting in a sitting room, a maid found us. Princess, I overheard that you are looking for a baby and a guard that was taken with her? She asked. That's right, I replied. What can you tell us? I saw Eduardo and his grandfather speaking in the hall about the kidnapped princess, and later that night I followed them until I saw an injured man being towed from the dungeons to the wagon they were using to escape. They escaped in a wagon with a baby and a guard they beat up? Katerina was furious at the fact that they had beaten up one of her family's guards. She glared at the floor. Can you lead us to the exit they used tomorrow? I asked the maid. Yes, Your Highness, she said, blushing. Of course I will. Have a good night. She left swiftly. I looked over at Katerina when my fiancée cleared her throat. I blushed at the look on her face. Sorry, I don't mean to attract the attention. She sighed. I know. She looked at me with a soft look. I'll see you tomorrow morning. Good night. I stood up and gave her a hug, kissing her lips briefly. Good night. Sleep well. I let her go and watched as she walked over to her room. Then I went to my room to sleep as well. It was going to be a long night if I let it. I better not let it then. I got ready for bed, climbed into bed, and surprisingly fell right off to sleep. The next morning I woke to bright sunshine beaming at me from the window next to the bed. I stretched and got up from the bed. Getting ready for the day, I made sure that my bag was still packed, and I walked out of my room with it in hand. Katerina was in the sitting room, waiting with her 2 bags at her feet. Good morning, Katerina. Good morning, Dmitri. You know, you can continue to call me Rena. She blushed slightly. I liked it. All right. Did you sleep well, Rena? I slept fine. How was your sleep? I smiled at her. I fell asleep right away. The maid from last night knocked and came into the sitting room. Oh, good, you're awake. I can take you to where they exited now if you want. Thank you. I picked up my bag while Katerina grabbed her bags. We stepped up to where the maid was standing. I motioned for the maid to lead the way, and she walked into the hall. We walked down a few halls to get to a set of huge double doors leading to the outside. I had your horses brought over here. I hope you have a safe trip, Prince Dmitri. The maid smiled and curtsied before she opened the door and let us through. Thanks, I replied, letting Katerina go ahead of me as I escaped the maid's advances. We walked over to our horses in the thin white blanket on the ground. The door shut as I glanced down at the ground. There were slight tracks of a wagon and horses on the ground under the light snow. What did you find? Katerina asked. Tracks, I answered. I looked up at her surprised face. On the road again, Katerina. Tracks? I asked incredulously. I walked back over to him from where I had been standing by my horse. Yes, he replied, pointing down at the wagon wheel tracks and hoof prints. I glanced down and saw that they were faint but still visible. Okay then. I kissed Dmitri on the cheek. Good work. Let's go get them. I walked back to my horse. I still hadn't named him. Dmitri nodded and walked over to his horse. As we mounted up, Dmitri led the way following the tracks after giving the stable hands a quick nod of thanks. I waved to the two stable hands as I left and turned to ride beside Dmitri. We had been riding for a couple of hours when the first flakes fell. This will make things harder for us. Dmitri grunted in frustrated agreement. His eyes kept looking at the tracks until the snow got heavier and the tracks were lost. Dmitri cursed. How are we going to find them now? I guess we just go in this general direction and see if we can catch a sign of their whereabouts. My worried gaze lingered on his face for a moment before I looked ahead of us at the path that was quickly becoming white. Dmitri nodded. Okay, but if this gets worse, we stop and find a place for the night. Deal. I nudged my horse into a quicker pace so that we wouldn't have to be in the snow for longer than necessary. I wanted to be warmer already. I hated winter. Too bad my birthday was this month. We were riding further and further north until the snow got too heavy and we were shivering within the many layers we wore. I see a house, said Dmitri. He was squinting into the distance at a few small hints of lights. Let's stop here for tonight. How can you see that? It's so far away. I glanced at him as we continued on. It's not as far as you think. The weather's just making it seem like it. Dmitri turned his horse slightly towards the house in the distance as he explained. I'll take your word for it, I say, keeping him in my sights as I followed closely. We only had to ride for 10 or 20 minutes in this winter storm, but it seemed much longer. Having such a heavy snowfall after weeks of winter weather but no snow, I wasn't used to the frigid temperature. My hair felt frozen to my head, and my gloved hands cramped around the reins. When we finally reached the front porch, Dmitri checked on me and cursed. He leapt off his horse and ran up to the door, knocking briskly. A man came to the door and opened it warily. When he saw the two of us, he called to his wife and sons. There were soon two young men and an older woman coming into view. Honey, please go get two baths ready. Boys, go take the horses and warm them up slowly inside the barn before coming back inside. The man opened the door wider for his boys to slip out and for Dmitri to help me inside. When I was brought in, I started slightly shivering immediately due to the warmth of the house. I was led to one bathroom and I was told to go ahead and get in. The woman from before would come in later to bring me some of my clothes. Thanks, I said. You're welcome, dear, said the woman. Then she left me to it. When I was alone, my numb fingers made slow work of undressing. I glanced up and stared at the mirror. My lips were blue. So that was why Dmitri cursed when he saw me. I turned to the tub of hot water and dipped my toe in. It stung. Hissing in slight pain, I stepped into the water and let myself slowly get used to the temperature as I lowered myself into a sitting position. It took my breath away as it warmed my bones slowly. I don't know how long I was soaking in the tub before I started feeling sleepy, but a knock at the door had me lifting my head to turn and look. It's just me, said the woman from before. She opened the door a crack and looked in. Here you go. She laid an outfit on the bathroom counter. Make sure you get clean too, she added with a little smile. Yes, ma'am. I smiled back at her. Please, call me Kelly. My son, Serif, let you two in. Kelly smiled at me again before leaving me to my bath. Kelly's nice. She reminds me of Mother, I thought, as I started scrubbing my body with soap. As I got clean, I thought about what my family must be going through right now. They probably didn't know that Elizabeth was alive. They were probably still mourning her. The thought of my brothers, mother, and sister-in-law mourning the tiny little princess hurt my heart. But it also made me more determined to find Elizabeth and bring her back. I quickly washed my hair and rinsed off before getting out and drying off. I got dressed and brushed my hair. Stepping out of the bathroom with the towel and my old dirty clothes, I went to find our hosts. I found Kelly and Serif in the living room with their two sons. Thank you for the use of your bath. I feel much better now. I smiled at the family. My hair was hanging down my back in loose, wet curls. Everyone looked up at me when I spoke, and Kelly stood up. It's no problem at all. Here, let me take your dirty clothes and we'll wash them tonight. Oh, I can do that. You don't need to worry about it. I blinked in surprise at her offer. Kelly smiled warmly. Don't worry, dear. I'd be happy to do it. It is no problem at all. She reached out for my clothes again. I looked past her at Serif, and he just nodded. I sighed and handed over my small bundle. I have more in my packs. I'll go get them. Okay. Kelly looked happy to have won. I pouted as I went to my packs next to the door. I grabbed the small bag that was in one of my packs. Kelly took the bag and said, Thank you. Now I'll wash them, and you'll have them by tonight. Oh, thank you. I watched as she walked into another room. I turned back to Serif and his sons. Do you know when the storm might end? Serif shook his head. It seems to be a bad one. It could be a few days. He saw my worried look and asked, "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath. My niece was kidnapped about a week and a half ago. Actually, longer. 2 weeks. Anyway, Dimitri and I are looking for her and the guard that was taken with her. The guys that took them went north, but with the snow, we have lost the trail. Ah, Sarif nodded solemnly. I understand. There is an abandoned fishing hut about an hour or two north of here. There's nothing else that is around here. What about that old house by the fishing hut? It's hidden in the woods around the fishing hut, said the oldest son. He was about 19 years old, now that I got a good look at him, and he had short blonde hair. Sarif blinked, thinking about what lied around the fishing hut. Oh, yes, I forgot about that. There's only an elder gentleman and his grandson live in there. So we just have to wait out the storm, and then it's only an hour or two until we find out a clue to where my niece is? I bit my bottom lip. Okay, then. I looked around the house. What could we do to pass the time away? Why don't we play some card games, or even board games? Asked the 15-year-old son. Oh, forgive me. I didn't introduce you to my sons. Sarif said, rubbing the back of his head. This is my oldest son, Richard, and my youngest son, Bryant. Nice to meet you, I replied to the boys. My name is Katerina Agate Peterson. I curtsied and bowed my head slightly. Princess Katerina from Amor? Bryant exclaimed. His eyes were huge. I stood straight. Yes, I replied. I smiled at the incredulous looks I got from Sarif and his sons. I giggled at the next question I received. Is that guy your guard? Asked Richard, intrigued. No, I replied. He's my fiancé, Prince Dmitri Romanova of... I was interrupted. Prince? Your fiancé? Where's your ring, then? That's what I've been wondering, came a voice from the kitchen behind me. I turned and saw Dmitri. I smiled as I pulled the chain around my neck from under my shirt. On the chain was the beautiful ring that Dmitri had given me. I keep it here. While I was journeying as a fortune teller, I couldn't very well have a ring so obviously expensive. The villagers would have thought that I had stolen it. Ah, Dmitri said, walking over to me. He wrapped me in his arms and continued by asking, You don't have to hide it now, do you? I shook my head slowly. I reached up to unclasp the chain, and when I had it in my hands, I took the ring off the chain. Dmitri unwrapped his arms from me and took the ring. Are you still willing to get married when we get back to Amor? Absolutely, I said fiercely. My gaze wasn't wavering as I stared into his eyes. He smiled wonderfully as he slid the ring back onto my left ring finger. Now you can't escape. We laughed lightly and briefly kissed. Then I pulled away when I heard fake gagging sounds come from behind me. It was Bryant, of course. He was grinning as he hid behind his older brother, who was just rolling his eyes. I laughed at Bryant's antics. Just wait until you get a girl of your own. I smiled at him. Richard laughed at his brother. Remember when I went to walk Lisa home? Bryant nodded and said, Yes. Her mother and father had given me permission to court Lisa. Richard smiled as he looked at Bryant. So you will see us hanging out more often. Okay, Bryant said, shrugging. He wasn't interested in girls in that way just yet. Plans are made. Daniel. I looked over at the baby that was being held by the maid. The man beside me was talking about our plans to expand our business overseas to the new land that I'd never been to before. Are you sure that our business would be profitable in this new land? I interrupted my business partner. He scowled at the interruption, but seeing as how I was the more important figure, he only replied, Yes, Daniel. Our business will thrive over there. It is my homeland, after all. He smirked as he mentioned the next phase. We only need to get the girls, and then we won't have to worry. The building is secure. I see, I replied as I turned back to him. Good work. I've gotten in touch with a man that will help us get the girls to the building. He's waiting on word from you that the building is ready for habitation. Understood, my partner said with a short nod. He stood up from the plush chair, straightening his lanky frame, and tipped his hat over his salt and pepper hair. Good evening, Daniel. Good evening, I say, making sure not to say his name so that my men wouldn't know who to rat out if we ever got caught. I walked my partner out the house and watched him walk to the waiting ship. The ship would take him over to the new land where he lived. I turned back to the house and went back to where the maid was watching the little princess. I stood there watching as she took care of the baby. The maid was gently bouncing Elizabeth, humming to her. My eyes narrowed. You aren't getting too attached, are you? My voice was frosty as I walked over to the woman. No, sire. Her eyes were wide as she looked at me. I'm not getting too attached. She looked down at the floor, her body hunched into itself as she noticed my closeness. I smirked at her fear. Good, because if you get so attached that you decide to ignore my orders to do what you think is better for the child, then I will kill you. Do you understand? I gripped her hair and leaned down into her space. I understand, sire. She had tears in her eyes. Good, I said again. I leaned away and let go of her hair before walking away. I knew that she would not betray me now. Whistling, I made my way to my office. I was wanting to make sure that our plans were going well on paper. I sat at my desk, going through the paperwork, when my grandson knocked on the open door. Looking up, I said, Come on in, Eduardo. Eduardo stepped into my office in trepidation. Grandfather, what do you have planned for Princess Elizabeth? I told you. You will find out when it comes about. I looked back at the paperwork and my hands in dismissal. I'll have the Peterson family destroy each other using Elizabeth. Eduardo nodded. Okay, grandfather. I suppose that we will rule the world after that? We will be on top of the world, I said. That's how our visit went. Eduardo finally left my office and I was finally able to continue marking up my plans. I crossed out a few things and added notes. The maid would probably have to go. I forgot her name already. Who cares what her name is, I thought. She's only here to take care of the baby until she's old enough to take care of herself. Eduardo would probably have to go as well, I realized. He was getting to be a nuisance. He was whiny and always butting into my plans. I wrote a small note that I would give to my partner. My grandson had outrun his usefulness. I bashed my hand against the desk at the plants that I had to toss out due to my grandson's incompetence, all because he had to leave my rooms at the castle. Dun dun dun. It's a small reading today, and my cat is stretching on the bed. So cute. But yeah. Wednesday we have episode 5, which is chapters 14, 15, and 16. And Friday we have episode 6, which is 17, 18, and 19. So we're getting close to halfway through the book. And I hope you enjoyed this reading, this episode. I had fun. We got done super quick. So we'll see how it goes. Let me know in the comments below if you like the pacing that I have for the readings, or if you want longer readings. Okay, and don't forget to go here and get the book if you want to read along with me. And I shall see you next time. All right, bye.